We got Charlotte, North Carolina, Colorado. Yes, definitely excited for the future. Yay. Midwife in Wisconsin. Aspiring doula from Rhode Island. Nice, greetings. Greetings, everyone. My name is F.A. Osarin. I am a birth worker based here in Brooklyn, New York, and the founder of Doula Chronicles. Doula Chronicles Reproductive Futurism has been a week. Today's the last day of a virtual gathering of us joining together and out of the work that Loretta Ross and Octavia Butler have laid out in front of us to follow in their footsteps. We have been dreaming and creating what a better future can look like around with pregnancy and birth this whole week. As birth workers, we're on the front lines of this maternal health crisis. We witness near misses, mistreatment from healthcare staff, and obstetric violence all the time. Grieving and mourning is a part of our work, but so is creating anew where it didn't exist before. This has been a space and will be a space to share what our comrades, what the future can look like. As said by one of our favorite elder Black midwives, Jenny Joseph, we are in the business of saving lives. Today, I'm joined with Tamika Middleton, Cara Page, Chanel Porche Albert, Donna Ann Davis, Lynn, and Pilar. Greetings all. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today? How's your heart? You can unmute yourself.
Full. It's full. Good to be here. Thank you.
Excited for the conversation.
Yes.
Armed seeing all of these folks on the screen.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a lot of birth workers today. A lot of midwives, a lot of doulas who are joining us. So I'm gonna get started, get right in. My question for you is, what is reproductive futurism?
Well, I feel like that's like the biggest loaded question ever. It's like, well, now that I have you in the room, let's just put it out there.
Or I could, what is it to you? Yeah, what is reproductive futurism to you?
When I thought about this question, I was thinking, first of all, I want to say that it feels challenging to think about futurism in the positive sense, given what happened last night with the ridiculous installment of that person on the Supreme Court. However, you do have to always think of the future, because if we stayed stuck in the present, we wouldn't survive. So what I'm thinking about when I think about reproductive future is drawn a little bit from Audre Lorde about it being survival, but survival is also about love. And so when I'm thinking about reproductive futures, I'm thinking about some form of enacting love. And I'm just throwing that out there to start off. I don't have a fully formed definition, but I was reading Audre Lorde, and that really reminded me about love as an act of survival.
I mean, I could jump in behind Donna. I think what comes up for me, and I'm biased as a born and bred Southerner, but I think about my good friend Sarah Days, just published this piece called "The South is a Portal," and she and I are both Gullah Geechee folks, and we've had these conversations about our Gullah Geechee traditions and our Southern traditions as being very much connected, and when we look back and re-examine them, feel very much in the tradition of Afrofuturism for us, and very much a reflection of how we see the techniques and tools that will carry us into the future. And so I feel like this is something that Loretta said when we were together last year at,
This is all themed from that conference.
and that conference, you know, we were having this conversation. Loretta was talking about, I think multiple people were talking about how we look back to what we had, you know, the tools that we had in the past to like help take us into the future. And I think about those things of like, what are those traditions? What are those things that are in the soil, in the marrow, in the spirit, you know, in the water that have carried us historically, that we can look to continue to carry us forward. So how are we returning all the work that so many of the folks on the call are doing around returning our birth traditions, around reclaiming those birth traditions, around returning us to midwifery practice, around returning us to a care that is centered on the birthing person, that is rooted in our cultures and our traditions. And so much of that outside of, beyond, past, through white supremacy and patriarchy, I think that is that's what I think about when I think about futures in reproduction.
Yeah, to build off that, I mean, I think for me, in doing this work for so long and really realizing, like, I feel like there's a lot of conversation that's always steeped in trauma and this kind of narrative of like healing from the trauma, but also putting the trauma before the hope and the resiliency that needs to be uplifted. So like veggie backing off of what you just said, you know, I think like I just came up, you know, this year with a concept called intergenerational hope, you know, which talks about, you know, how we're connecting the intersections of transgenerational messages passed down to our culture, you know, our familiar, our language, justice, love, purpose, ancestral remembrance. And, you know, and it's triggered by our commitment to center joy and self-care and accountability and self and community. And it's really, you know, and centering that justice framework of like, what does it mean for us decolonized systems, but to do it in a way that makes us feel good. You know what I mean? Like to do it in a way where we're not making ourselves sick. You know, I remember seeing like my mom in her resiliency, you know, raising two young daughters by herself and being sick, and like that point of where you get to where like you do this work and you get sick, like your body is sick, your mind gets tired, you're physically and emotionally drained.
And many of us keep going until the day that we are done.
Right. You know what I mean? And it's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be where while we're doing it, we're also uplifting the hope. We're also, you know, creating pathways to center self-care and whatever that means, like, you know, for that individual. We're also, you know, centering that intentional love and being intentional about, as much as we can talk about what's wrong, we're also talking about what's going right, you know, while we're in it, you know, not waiting till someone's not here anymore to talk about it. Not, you know, I just feel like, you know, we've seen it. We continue to see it. We were on Instagram, we're scrolling, like people talk about this went wrong, that went wrong, this happened. And it's important for us to know that, but there needs to be more balance in the other stuff of what's going right and how people are intentionally shifting that work in the present and the now, which is impacting the future. You know what I mean? And I think there's just not enough of that takes place. And so I see futurism as being intentional about centering intergenerational hope, like fire burn trauma. Anybody like the trauma? Okay, we got that. We know that that's present. That's good. What does it mean for us to work towards the other stuff where we, you know, we're light workers in the work that we do?
Thank you for that, Chanel, Tamika, and Donna. I was just struck in a moment to say how we are the past, the future of the past, right? So we're living in the future of our ancestors in this moment. And, you know, when people say you are your ancestors' dreams, you know, on t-shirts, but I also think of it as they had to have had some vision of where we are now. And so as I think of reproductive futurisms, I want to hold on to, as hard as things are right now, as you're saying, this hope and this idea that there's a lot going right, a hell of a lot going right. And in fact, that's why we feel, the oppressive aspects of this moment, only because it's backlash against everything that we are doing right and pushing for and living our truths in ways that I haven't witnessed before in my lifetime, right? So we have to hold both of those. And I think what does drive us is this aspect of resistance. So there's resilience, but there is resistance, and resistance, is pressure against something that, as it's applied, it's also pressured towards us if we don't do it well. So if we're going to resist, we've had anthems of resistance, but I also think of resistance as being a way of recognizing our power and our force. And the more that we do that collectively, I can't imagine a future without us building a broader, powerful force even than what we know, because I think the biggest challenge in the moment is connecting all of the rightness. People call them pods, call them concentric circles, however you think of that. But I still think there are more of us who are doing right than the wrongdoers, the harm doers. But I think even with this virtual space, connecting all of us still feels daunting to me. And I'd like to see how we can bring this future together as we imagine how powerful we truly are. Because we have the internet and we have telecommunication in every form imaginable that our ancestors didn't have, and they still, ran the Underground Railroad and figured, a hell of a lot of stuff out without the technology we have today. So I almost feel like, what's our excuse?
We're not doing enough.
If we think about that just for a moment, if we just hold that for a moment, what's to stop us?
Yeah. I mean, that's so true. I feel like, some of the conversations seem so limiting at times, you know what I mean? Where people, I don't know, where there's this like loss of expansion, of feeling like you have room to move and to breathe and to like be free. You know what I mean? Like I see reproductive futurism as also freedom, like, in all of its forms and essence. And I think people are sometimes afraid to be free, afraid of like, because we've been so suppressed in so many ways, like it becomes this level of comfortability that when we get a sense of it, we sometimes back away or shy away from it in some senses. And I want to see people run more to it, you know what I mean? And allow themselves the vulnerability, even with, knowing that it may be painful, it's a balance. And I think that we just have to trust one another enough to just be able to say, you know what, I'm just gonna like let it be, like let it open up to all its possibilities, in all of its forms.
I think that what we're seeing, in spite of like all the hardship and things that we've been experiencing in this moment, in this year, I think what we have also seen is a bit of a cracking open, where people are starting to do some of that visioning. People are starting to recognize like, oh, we need to figure some things out, because what we thought we could rely on, we can't. And also starting to do some of the necessary building of trust, and necessary building of connection, and necessary building of visions for what freedom might look like, for what this next moment might look like. Some of this kind of connection to, connection to each other, and building these pods. Like that's something like there are a lot of us who are in community right now. I can speak about Atlanta, who we've never been in community before. Like people like, I've been organizing in Atlanta for more than a decade, and I'm like, oh, what? Who are you? And so there is like this coming together. There is this relying on each other and connecting to each other. All this mutual aid work that's happening. There is
It's just
all
like
of
to
this
say
like,
mutual aids and
yes,
bridges.
coming together. Like there's really like this moment where it was like all this pressure that really cracked something really beautiful open for us. And so I think that what I think we run the risk of in thinking about like this upcoming week and thinking about like what just happened is we run the risk of allowing these folks to like limit our vision and to stop us from being able to see past what they are doing, and reverting us to where we were pre this cracking open. And I think we were in a moment when we were saying, oh, you know, we've put out that we had this hashtag in Georgia. We're like, Georgia got Georgia, like we have us. And we had this moment where we got to recognize, where we were recognizing, oh, well, we have to have each other. And so we're going to have to figure that thing out. And now they're putting us in this space where we're feeling this level of fear again, where I think what is definitely happening in this future is that we have to know that we have to rely on each other. We have to know that we got each other. We have to know that we can't rely on the state, on the medical industrial complex, on the prison industrial complex, on all these things. We have to rely. We have to lean on each other. We may not be able to rely on, you know, quality, accessible abortion care, but you know what? We got tools for that. You know, like we have to be able to recognize that we have
Got midwives.
Yes, birth work.
No, the thing that came up for me, and I mentioned this to Lynn earlier, like I know that we all have the dreams of reproductive futures differ for different people, right? They don't all have the same like desire. But the one that I was thinking about, which I think dovetails with what a lot of people are saying here, is this, you know, remember maroonage, right? This creation of a space that is free, where we can depend on each other, where we're practicing outside of the, as you say, the medical industrial complex. Yes, we can do self-managed abortions. Yes, we can perform abortions. Yes, we can deliver babies. Yes, we can do all of these things, pass on this knowledge. And I've really been thinking about how this creation of a kind of reproductive maroonage is a way to think about a form of, it is a form of resistance, right? In relationship to supremacy, all of the supremacies, because I don't think it's only white supremacy, but I think there are different forms of supremacy. Yeah. Right. And, you know, I mean, and I know that there are some people who want to work within system. I happen to work within system, but I am not opposed to facilitating, helping, and supporting outside of system. I'm not you know, I think it is important that we have these maroonage communities, that we have people that work inside. But that to me is the closest thing that I can think of that comes to this, a reproductive future that's about freedom, that's embedded in notions of freedom.
I also just want to jump in here and say, I want to take it back to the portals. I like the word portals. I've been working a lot thinking about cosmologies, like what are the maps of our ancestors and what are the maps we're trying, like the webs we're trying to create. So like, I guess I'm trying to say like beyond movements, what are the political, cultural, social, spiritual cosmologies? So I'm gonna go here. Interplanetary, like what are we imagining beyond false borders or ideas of what it is we're trying to build? And I've been thinking a lot about inside of that, ancestral technologies. Like there's so much, and I do appreciate Dr. Ruha Benjamin talking a lot about science and race and technology. This question of I'm having around, sometimes we don't name our ancestral medicines, including birth work and light work, as technologies. And I think, and I'm not trying to say that in a capitalist way, I'm just trying to say in a spiritual, ancestral way, that I think it may have undermined what it is that we have created pre-colonization, pre-supremacists, you know, that we, inside of radical imagination and to believe that we could create and build beyond, we built technologies. We have been, and so even in this idea of talking about, I'm gonna say generational trauma, this idea that epigenetics that people have created epigenetics as that's a new concept. And I was like, wow.
And weathering.
Indigenous sorry?
The weathering, when hearing that word.
Right. Well, Indigenous and Black folks have been talking about cellular memory. Let's not even talk about trauma. Let's just say cellular memory. Let's talk about what we know, what is in our gut, what is our intuition. We have been displaced from that as part of the colonialist project. So if we could just go deeper into, this is all memory work. I truly believe that, to understand who we were before colonization and slavery, and now to understand where, loving Loretta Ross's reproductive futurism idea, who will we be beyond? So I do think there's this place that we're going to really have to get inside ourselves and imagine something we've never imagined before. And I'm curious and I'm excited about it, but I want to do it in alignment with saying we will build technologies, ancestral, spiritual, cultural, cellular technologies that transcend borders of what we think we are capable of.
I just really, oh, sorry, go ahead, Pilar.
I'll wait. I was wondering, Kara, if you thought about if one of the forms of ancestral technologies is storytelling.
Cultural work, sound is vibration, frequency.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think so. What do y'all think?
I mean, speaking of stories, that futurism to me sounds very sci-fi, and in a good way, like an invitation to really go out there to the most wild sort of, visions, set aside what you know of the world as it actually is. And I think that that's really important, because while there's real power in resistance, I think, and not to say that Black and Brown and Indigenous folks don't have traditions to return to and to reclaim that are really powerful, but I do think that there is something very real about, our realities shape what we know and what we understand and how we think. And by doing that, they also limit our vision. And so thinking about futurism in this kind of sci-fi way, I don't actually read a lot of sci-fi, but what I understand about it is that oftentimes in these stories, there's some sort of apocalypse, right? Some sort of disturbance or disaster or terrible moment that destroys a lot of things. There's a mass act of destruction. And from that, people then have the opportunity to rebuild something in just like a wildly new way. And so I really appreciate the space that FA has created here to think, not just about reacting and the tactics we're going to use to resist the current system, which is, my bread and butter and what many of you all do, right? Very, very grounded in the moment, what we need next, what tactic, works that we already know works to move us in this incremental way, but to create space to be proactive and think about what we want. And I think when I do that, what I come down to, what someone else already said, is that what would it mean to separate sexuality and reproduction, not just birth, but sexuality and reproduction from a social hierarchy? Because right now, they're like, there's no way to separate birth from the reproduction of social hierarchy, from white supremacy, from the labor and the exploitation. And if we could separate our sexuality and our reproductive desires from any form of investing in or recreating or maintaining a social hierarchy, it might be incredibly different. And it's hard to imagine, but I think the futurism is really an invitation to be bold about it.
Kara, you said we have to imagine what we can't imagine. And I immediately thought, how do we imagine what we can't imagine? I've been feeling like even in the theme of reproductive futurism, that our imagination is still limited and that it's still controlled in this, pocket of what they tell us to imagine. We watch the thing we just put in the chat, we watch Lovecraft Country, and now we think, oh, that's the imagination. Hippolyta going to these different planets and living multiple, lives. But without watching that, would we have imagined that? Like our imagination is controlled by media, it's controlled by hashtags and what we see online. And yeah, but how do we imagine what we can't imagine? What does that look like? How do we practice that?
Yeah, but I think you're practicing that right now because we're all in this space, right? And so like that's the part of like the acknowledging what's happening at that very moment and like centering that, like that moment that of the conversation that had, with Loretta at that point at the conference that led to sparking, that bit of information. Like just from this conversation, I'm like, oh, what does it mean for us to have instinctive building? You know what I mean? What does it mean? Like where you're teaching from a space of, oh, like everything is intuitive. You know what I mean? Everything is about the reclamation. Everything is about the rebirth. Everything is about the understanding of every single moment is that moment that you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like as I watch the chat scroll and people are having these aha moments, like that is it. That's that expansion. That is that portal being opening and people having those ideas, you know what I mean, that are sparked every single moment. So but we have to take those moments to like reflect and to acknowledge them as they happen, like, and so I'm acknowledging like you've created that for us right now. That's why we're all here, to be able to have this conversation, which is thereby creating it for other people, right? And it's continuing.
Off of that, yeah.
Yeah.
But we also know these things from the life cycle, right? I mean, you look at the life of inside the womb until birth, it doesn't imagine the world outside the womb, right? And then we're here in this realm and we can't imagine what it's like on the other realm of life as we know it. So I think those are, and yet some of us connect to those, what Kara again said, called cellular memory. I think we all have the potential for that type of limitless imagination without confinement, as long as we are open to it. I've had connections to people on the other side, as you might say, and it terrified me. But I had this healthy respect for those moments of it, whenever I had those experiences. And so I think there's a way to not be limited, as long as we also believe that we can, that it is there for us to connect to. We may not be able to predict or time it. Sometimes it speaks to us without us being as conscious as we would like to be. And at other times it's clear as a bell. You have I call it a shower moment sometimes, when something just comes to me and it's really clear what I need to do. And other times I can be sitting around trying to come to some, clarity, and it ain't happening, so that kind of, so it may be a little unpredictable, but I think it's also what we practice. If we don't put it into practice and praxis, then we are limited. So this idea of imagination in childhood, I often think that, we're stifling children's imagination with oversaturation of media and all that, because I remember my childhood as being just chock full of play outdoors, play in space without gadgetry and things of that nature. And so we can train ourselves to be more imaginative. And that's how some of us go in, we find a way to do that. Some of us have to go off into certain spaces for periods of time to get to that, and others have to use some inducements or what have you, but find a way so that we can be more in tune to it, and also continue to find a way to connect with it, again, by talking to others about their experiences, being imaginative, envisioning with others. It's not something you do in isolation, as Tamika says. You have to connect with others and hear the the bouncing of ideas. And we have to, I still think we have to connect with people with whom we don't have the closest affinities and agreements. We ain't gonna build this
Right, yeah.
in our little, you
Bubble.
know, clustered corners and echo chambers and whatnot. I really don't believe that's possible. And I think some of us are better at building those bridges than others. So let those people do that. And others are better at taking care of the community, you know, creating the self-care environment among us, you know, but let's at least identify what role we're all going to play so there's some synergy in that.
Yeah, I want to echo what you were saying to Lynn around practice, especially as it relates to like visioning and that kind of otherworldly connection, ancestral connection, spirit connection, whatever, you know, we want to call it, that it is really a muscle that you build and you build over time. And the more you are in that exercise of the thing, the more you build that muscle. And so even if you're like, you know, you are a spirit worker, like the more you are in practice, the more you're in your apprenticeship, the more you are in ritual, the stronger your gift is, the stronger your connection is, the easier it is for you to go there. And I think it's the same thing with visioning. Like, and I think it's something that in movements, we don't practice enough. We don't, like, even, you know, I spend so much of my movement life in the world of abolition. And now, you know, abolition from when I came into abolition, it's much more of a prevalent conversation. It's much more accepted. But then when you ask people to vision, to tell us the world you vision, right, like they're still like in the death penalty. And I'm like, oh, our vision, what's happening with our vision? And it really is a matter of us needing to be in the practice of visioning the world we want to see. And I think the thing about children too is that they give us an opportunity to be in practice of a different kind of vision. I think the thing about birthing is that it gives you an opportunity to be in a practice of a different kind of connection, like that kind of connection and tapping in, like the pregnancy and
transition thing.
Listen, there's a veil, honey. And that veil is thin.
That's a portal.
That's the physical portal.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, how do we spend time in that practice of tapping in to our own connection to you know, to whether it be your ancestors, to whether it be your Orisha, to whether it be your Egbe, whatever it is you call it in your tradition, to tapping, you know, whatever brain waves it is, how you connect to those things is also our practice. And I want to offer too that as you're talking about identifying who are the folks who play different roles, like, because, you know, I don't consider myself one of the bridge builders. Like, let me stay in my pocket. Talk to my people. But there are those folks for whom it may be their role. They have a stronger muscle at visioning. They have a stronger muscle at cultivating and creating the space for us to do that vision work, cultivating, creating the space for us to get deep and tap in. And I think that figuring out who those people are and ensuring that we are utilizing them, because so often I think that's not a skill that is valued in the same way inside, especially inside of movement spaces, as some of the other skills and gifts that people have. Like, same as I think also the memory work is a skill that is not valued in the same way, but it is valuable and it is necessary. And so how we lift up all the different roles that we have to play, if we're thinking about where we're going, if we're not thinking just about, as Pilar was saying, being grounded in the moment and what we have to do to combat this thing that we are up against right now, how do we, one, carve out the time to be in space where we are visioning, where we are cultivating, where we are remembering, we are tapping in, and then how do we figure out who are our people, who are the conjurers of those moments, who are the curators of those moments, and how do we hold and honor that as a valuable piece of the work that we're doing.
I want to respond just a bit to the question that you asked earlier about how can we think about future in the context of all of this, all the media that we operate in, which I know everybody's been talking about, but I was thinking about yes, we need to practice, but we also, I think, need to acknowledge the fact that sometimes the things that we do in our day to day allows us to think about visioning, but we're not always recognizing it. So in the dream time, there's when we're sleeping, or we can be, wake dreaming. When you have a deja vu moment, when you sit at your altar, if you have an altar, when you take 30 or 40 seconds because you got a Calm app, or 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 the creation of art, or when you remember a song. I mean, all of those, I think, are the kind of practices that I think people are talking about, where those are the ways in which we really are not constantly reacting to the technology of, the constructed technology of social media. And I think it does counteract when you tell somebody what your dream was the night before. We can find a future in that. We can find a past in it as well. We can find a present,
There's a message in there.
right? Right. So all the spaces with their dimensions, and people taking time, you know, I was just recently trying to cajole my 89-year-old mother to draw, just draw. She had a stroke several years ago, and so she doesn't always get inside the lines. But she started doing it, and she just kind of like spaced out. I don't know where she was, but it was like really wonderful to watch her not be worried about the fact of what was going on with her, or what had gone on. And so those are moments, I think, where we need to acknowledge just the incredible ways that we have our own will, we have a collective will to create, to think, to move, to spirit, to practice, that allows us to be creative. And I mean, and as Chanel said, the fact that you and Loretta, even thought about like reproductive futures in the context of a moment where, as you all say, we're constantly talking about all that is wrong. That is an act of futurism.
Loretta Ross is actually in the comments. I want to read out what she said. Can we imagine that birth is available to all genders? Can we imagine birth outside of bodies, uterine replicators according to Bujo? Can we imagine different human beings intentionally being developed through genetic manipulation? Can we imagine crossbreeding between species? Can we imagine our people already on other planets, brother from another planet? For real, interplanetary consciousness that is both external and internal, because we're scarcely explorer of all our human senses, like ESP and telekinesis. No, I've never imagined that.
I see Loretta's last comment about the cosmology of the pussy, and I'm just very about the language. I love it. But then this concept of like the most the story of birth and the divine feminine energies, and it makes me think of, in the Orisha tradition, the deity Oshun, who is one like the Orisha. But before the Orisha, there's the Erumale, and those are like the original deities. And Oshun was the female among them. She's the only female Erumale. And in this, the story goes that they all came down from heaven. All these Erumale came down from heaven to earth. And they were trying to do all these things, but like it's all these dudes, and they like, I'm finna make the yam flour, I'm finna grow the vegetables, I'm finna, make the paths and everything. And everything they did failed. And so they went to God and was like, God, what is happening? Why are all our things failing? And God was like, where's Oshun? Where's the female among you? And they were like, what you mean? And he's like, God's like, until you consult the female amongst you, everything, like Silly said,
everything will fail.
And so they had to go back to earth, and they had to appease Oshun. And then all of everything they did was starting to be prosperous. And so whenever in the tradition, whenever you're doing a ritual, you always call upon Oshun through that verse, through that Odu, in order to make your ritual successful, because you have to have that feminine energy. You have to have the divine feminine in the work in order to make the work that you do successful. So that's something that like I was thinking about, Loretta, when you were naming that is always like, throughout all the various traditions, like the reality of that kind of divine feminine and the need to tap on the divine feminine to get what you're trying to get is so very important.
Makes me think about the sort of mystery that surrounds birth and pregnancy and reproduction, and how like there's actually some power and some joy or some ways that we celebrate sort of like the mystery of creation, even when it happens, you know, among people. And I wonder sort of in this future space that we're all going to create, what would be the way, I'm really interested in the ways that we can sort of demystify our bodies and sexuality and sort of like the stigma that comes from what is currently like the mystery that we hold around that. Because I think there's a lot of harm actually in the way that, you know, birth and pregnancy and even breastfeeding and things that are just very core to how we decide to form families and nurture our families are sort of like tucked away in this private sphere that you know, you don't learn about until you're in the moment often, and often that's too late. And there's just a ton of stigma that is allowed to sort of surround these events in our lives and these physical processes. And so I wonder what demystifying that in a good way would look like, but also then sort of celebrating the mystery that I think continues to really captivate people around decisions to, you know, to create the families and then pursue that and give birth.
Can I just add something to what you said, Pilar? Because I do know that, you know, there's a plethora of mystery around creation, but there's also mystery around not doing that. And I just want to acknowledge that there are people, you know, that, right, we all know this, right? There are people that don't, but there's mysteries of, there's the mystery of the sage woman who no longer menstruates, who has no children. And I just want us to be thinking about the ways that we can undo some of the ways in which we view her as harm, or we view her as spinster, or we view that person as not enough. So it's like maybe it's also just the mystery of being as well as that mystery of creating. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because there's just a lot of people, right, for whom birthing is not, we know this. I mean, I'm not saying anything nobody knows, but I'm just saying it out loud, because I think we gestured a lot toward giving birth and thinking less about, you know, people who are in menopause, people who don't want to give birth, right? Who also have mystery, who have power that's spectacular.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, yeah, the menopause, the perimenopause, like I want to have more conversations around like what happens when you're going through that part of your life and nobody talks about that, and you have, you know, can we have that conversation? Nobody talks.
We just started talking about birth.
It's like, but it's a part of the birth process too. Like, you know, because even as someone who has so many children, which to some people is not a lot, and to some it's a whole lot. Like I've decided I don't want any more children. I have no desire to have any more children, you know, but even in that process of not wanting to anymore, I also, you feel the sense of, I don't know, like you kind of do when you see one, then you don't see it, you're good. But the perimenopause thing has your mind go into different spaces where you're like, why don't people have conversations about, you know, what does it mean to transition from having to not having to, or not wanting to, you know, and all those different spaces, and how all of it is okay. Like you said, like all of it, like whether you want to have children, don't want to have children, like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's all good, you know?
I just dropped in the chat, there's an offering that Sis Omishade Bernie Scott out of North Carolina has a podcast called Black Girls Guide to Surviving Menopause.
You have to check that out.
Yeah, and this idea that, you know, we feel tortured by our menstruation, most of our lives, and then we grieve when it's gone. What does that mean? And I'm not saying that's true of all of us, because that actually hasn't been my experience. I've relished all of the cycles, actually. I have, but I also know those who have been pained by those cycles. So I'm saying we can hold those contradictions, and I think contradictions are important. Like that's crucial to what we're describing right now. It's like the mystery and the science, the scientific explanation of things. We can have both, right? We can think of it as mysterious and mystical, but we can also think of it as grounded in some scientific or natural truths. At the same time, we're not, and that's not being, a positivist at all. I'm quite the contrary, but I do think that we have, but I hold all my contradictions. There's a quote by Alice Walker, I'll mess up in the moment, because that's where my menopause takes me right now, is to moments of memory lapses. Be No One's Darling is the poem, though. So if anyone can put it in the chat who can remember it better than I can, but hold your contradictions and somehow wrap yourself like a shawl. I'm really messing it up. So forgive me, Alex.
You who told me to buy Possessing of the Secret of Joy?
No, this is from a book of poems, I believe, earlier than that. Yeah, I'll find it and put it there.
But I also love what you're saying, Lynn, and also what Loretta put around. I started menopause at 25 and at 65, but the spectrum or the cycles of bleeding, or our relationship to blood and birth and death. I just, if we're thinking about futurism again, I wanna think again about how do we debunk the myth that this is linear, right? That there's not cyclical ways that we're birthing or relating to a bleeding. I also want to debunk the myth of who can create, what bodies can create, who can co-create, pod create, multi-create. Like if we're really trying to get to some futurist ideas, I do think it opens up, yes, holding contradictions, but also holding the spectrums of these things, because sometimes it sounds so linear and we know it's not. We know it's not.
And there's something that came up when you were talking just now, Kara, and kind of connected to to what Loretta was naming earlier, but also the concept of contradictions. Also the contradictions of, if we're talking of reproductive futurism and the sci-fi sense that Pilar was naming, and thinking about technology and sci-fi and how we hold the contradictions around medical technologies, how we hold the contradictions around the impacts and consequences of different kinds of medical technologies that may change the landscape of what birth and reproduction look like, but also surveil us, but also exclude certain peoples. And so we have to also be holding, we're thinking about the future and reproductive futures, how we hold the contradictions of technologies in the more mainstream sense of the word.
Right, because it's already on its way, right? I mean, in terms of thinking about who reproduces and how gender is attached to that, right? We already have assisted reproductive technologies that are starting to expand that, and then it comes, with that comes also a lot of ethical questions and a lot of opportunities for the technology to simply reproduce the oppression that we already have and we already deal with. But we've also started, it's also, I think, on its way in terms of the social side of it, not just the medical technologies, but in the ways that people are completely redefining their own gender identities and their experiences with sexuality and reproduction and family formation. And I think, of course, while there's a lot more to do, I think even just the conversation around that and the way that people are thinking about gender has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. We are lots of things to be vigilant about, but also really interesting things to think about.
And yet it's ancient, right? You know, so it's new to us, but it also isn't new, you know. Male extinction anxiety. Whew.
How will we address male extinction anxiety if we learn to successfully reproduce without them? Someone said, "Bye, man, LOL." They're already anxious. Yeah, as we can see yesterday. Go ahead.
The fact that things are possible doesn't mean that it will be a fait accompli. There are still going to be people who want to reproduce with men. So I'm not so, you know, with male gendered bodies. So I think I think it's a really great question, but I also think that it could get to a level of heightened anxieties, pre-existing anxieties, when in fact, you know, I think that the idea of creating with a male person is too seductive for a lot of people for it to be, you know, an extinct pattern of making. But I think it is an interesting question because male anxieties get triggered by almost everything.
We have to get, okay. I'll just get beyond the binary, right? Because we're talking about, where are we talking about? Trans men birthing and trans people birthing. So yeah, I thought that's where you were going down there, but just opening it up.
I mean, and that as well. Yes. I mean, it was all part of it. It didn't all come out in the same way, but
okay.
Yes.
It's all our binaries and dichotomies.
And contradictions.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think that question has like a particular sort of bite to it too in this week, right? Like with this coming election and just looking at how white men in this country are feeling anxiety about the potential loss of their dominance and how that is really driving our politics at this moment. And so, you know, I think part of it is about relevance and about whether or not we continue as a society to define maleness as dominance and you know, in all these toxic ways, right? Because there could be other definitions, other ways of viewing men and maleness, and you know, that don't have to rely on that as dominance as the foundation.
We have to bring a spiritual conversation back, right? Like, or have a conversation about masculine, feminine, still binary, it's trippy. Can reproductive futurism include talking about medicine and spirit that's not, that's not binary, it's on a spectrum. And I do want to bring back, and that also means to me a relationship to land, to water, to air, to breath. Like it's, you know, not to limit only our relationship to masculine and feminine as being something that's only contained in the physical body. I want us to talk about atoms, molecular atoms. Are they engendered? I don't think so. Do they need to be? I don't think so. So like, can we just open the conversation on that too?
What do we do? So I have a question.
Talk to me.
Really into this. Like, what do we do with all of the gendered ways in which the Anthropocene exists, right?
Yes.
The river, her, the ocean, her, the earth.
I know it's challenging.
Like what? And then, and maybe a reproductive futurism is also a language issue.
A language cosmology that we have to change.
Yeah.
Yes.
Language is so expansive, but also so limited at the same time. You know, it's how do we put in this conjuring and medicine into actual words that we are telling stories with and passing on?
Well, I also want to offer sound, or like not just stories verbally. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off, Efe. I
No,
got
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
It's like, and I know Donna asked about stories earlier, sound, breath, like we're not just talking about stories that are orated, right? Because it makes me think of Alexis Gumm's work around the new book that she's got coming out around marine mammals and interspecies language conversation that it expands words.
I also want to offer sort of like what Lynn was naming earlier about this, you know, some of the stuff being new to us, is that we've actually continued to limit our language more and more. And like there are some ways in which, and some histories and some memory work there too around the languages that we've had historically, that we've had ancestrally, that are not as limiting as the language that we have now, and as the ways in the modes of operating that we have now, that, you know, we're not all like people are reclaiming, you know, language around two-spirit and so on and so forth. But a lot of the language that we had been accustomed to, you know, is much more limited than languages that we've had historically. And so how do we tap back into those things? How do we not just like, you know, a lot of it, and what we said last year is that a lot of this is that we don't have to recreate the wheel. We actually are just having to do some damn remembering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So as
I just want to say, I've been calling my work Changing Frequencies, because I don't want to just change systems anymore. I want to change fucking frequencies. I was like, and I think whatever that means, let's call it what it means. But to enter the conversation with, oh, I'm changing frequencies, how people receive that, they're like, what? I was like,
yeah,
what if we are doing more than changing systems? And we're changing. Let's take it back to hope. I'm gonna take it there. Intergenerational hope, that requires changing our frequency.
Yes, it's about listening to the vibes. Like I mean, I'm always like, what's the vibe? Like, what's really good? Like, and when I say it,
and you know that's a word that's been in the millennial space all year. The vibes. What's the vibes? How the vibes feeling?
But I've been saying, like, what's the vibe? What's really good? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what's vibrationally, like, you know, not just saying like, oh, are you good? But like on a spiritual, cellular, like, you know, all of the different frequencies that one can be on, like, what is the vibe? Like, what are you feeling intuitively? Like, how is that, you know, how are you tapping into that intuition? How are you like allowing that to manifest, where you're decolonizing like all of the messages that have been stored, right, in your cellular DNA, so you can like birth what it is that you want. Because birth is so many different things. It's not just a physical act of someone coming through you. It's like, it's the birthing of like ideas. It's the breath of life. It's the, you know, the breath of hope. It's like, it's all of these different things that I think we forget to tap into. You know, what is the vibe? Like, what's, you know, what's the frequency? Like, what frequency you on? If your frequency ain't right, like, I'm not messing with you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we can't know. You know what I mean? Like, but it's the same thing, because vibrationally, you know, when it comes to the manifestation of babies and people and children and all of those different things, like, those are the things that we rely on. Those are the things that that bring us hope. Those are the things that, you know, we tap into, that make us feel good, you know, like your smiles, you know what I mean? Like all of that, we need all of that. And we just had to be more intentional about it.
I want to quote Donna, who just wrote me, changing the frequency of sonic patriarchy. I'm gonna add sonic.
That's a t-shirt.
Come on, sonic white supremacy. Oh, yes. You would have
two t-shirts, or the front.
Yes, that's t-shirt, the front and the back.
The back says, what's the vibe, yeah?
What's the vibe?
This has been wonderful. I wish we could go into this a whole lot more. I told y'all this was going to be a kitchen table talk, right? Didn't I? I truly appreciate each and every one of you, and I am looking forward to more futurism and more changing frequencies and sonics, and using more than just our words, more vibrations. And yeah, this is I don't know if you can see how many notes I took down tonight. Follow us on Doula Chronicles on Instagram. This will be uploaded for all the people to see. And rest well, nourish yourself. Have a great night.
Keep vibing.
Peace.
Blessings.
Peace
Peace.
and blessings.
Peace and light.
Thank you.
Yes.